Dr. David Beuther has been treating lung patients for years, and over time he's watched something shift. Increasingly, his patients are staying inside. Not because their disease has gotten worse, but because the air outside has.
I'm starting to see their quality of life and their joy going downhill because of the climate and the weather and the challenges that they face.
We talk about climate change in terms of degrees and disasters, melting ice caps, rising seas. But there's another story unfolding, one that's literally taking our breath away. And it's happening right now in examination rooms across the country where doctors are prescribing something they never thought they'd have to: stay inside.
I think it is important for us to make that connection for patients because we need to elevate the general awareness that our health is being affected by this. And I think the closer climate effects are to people's lived experience on a day-to-day basis, the more real this is going to get and the more change that's needed is going to happen.
This week, we're going off the radar to talk with a pulmonologist about the air we breathe and what happens when we can't.
As a physician, I'm supposed to have that cape on and go be a hero and fix things, and I can't always fix this.
I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie, and you're listening to Off the Radar, a production of the National Weather Desk. On the show, we dig deep into topics about weather, climate, the ocean, space, and much more. Our goal is to help you better understand the weather and to love it as much as we do. Welcome to Off the Radar. I'm Emily Gracie. This week, I'm sitting down with Dr. David Beuther, a pulmonologist at National Jewish Health, who's on the front lines of a crisis most of us don't even realize is happening. He's watching his patients become prisoners in their own homes, not just because of their lung disease, but because of what is in the air outdoors. We're going to talk about wildfire smoke, longer pollen seasons, which at-home tools you should use, and which ones you should skip. We'll discuss how Dr. Beuther navigates the delicate conversation about climate change with his patients, and how day-to-day weather patterns can trigger symptoms. Well, Dr. Beuther, thank you so much for talking to me today. I need an expert to give me some information on health here because we are weather experts, but weather and health are so closely intertwined. Pressure, temperature, humidity, all these different things that change every day. How do those impact the lungs?
One of the things that we see most commonly, and maybe this is really something we want to get into later, is heat-driven changes to climate and air quality. And so heat in temperature is a big issue, maybe not directly, but through its effects, increasing issues with ozone in the summer, increasing kind of dust and particulate pollution, increasing risk and frequency and severity of wildfires, which can really have regional or national effects on air quality. And so, maybe the biggest thing I'm noticing with my patients, who are generally those with chronic lung disease, is that they're struggling to really get by every summer now. They spend more and more time hiding from the outdoors, staying inside. And these are the patients that need to be active. They need to be exercising. They need to be moving. And they're kind of becoming prisoners in their home with the windows shut and the air conditioning on, trying to watch the air quality. So that's really the biggest thing I'm seeing. But, the temperature really more affects cardiovascular disease than pulmonary disease in terms of direct effects. Changes in barometric pressure certainly are felt by patients with lung disease, but tends not to be as important directly as more. Usually a big change in barometric pressure means big changes in temperature and humidity and storms and wind, and that can kick up a lot of things. Wind is a big issue for respiratory disease. There was an interesting event in Australia where there was a thunderstorm that came through, and there were hundreds or possibly even thousands, I think, people going to the emergency room with flare-ups of COPD and asthma due to a sudden burst of pollen associated with a giant thunderstorm. And we see that on a smaller scale with big thunderstorms in the U.S. And so when these fronts roll in, they're really interesting if you're a weather nerd. They're a lot of fun to watch, but they carry with them danger, not just things like tornadoes and wind events, but they actually can cause some significant health events.
Something I hear people say a lot is, like if a system comes through, like a thunderstorm or even a hurricane, they say, oh, it must have stirred up a lot of stuff because my allergies are flaring up. Is that real, or is that just something people are saying?
it's absolutely real. I mean, we see it. And there are people out there that have disease that is not severe, maybe very well controlled. And part of our goal of controlling a condition like asthma is that you really feel normal. And we don't always achieve that, but often we can. And part of the goal is to be more resilient so that you aren't thinking day to day or minute to minute about what you're exposed to. You're resilient to those things. But a big enough impact, and knowing that 40 to 50% of people with asthma don't have it under complete control, we get a lot of this. And what it seems to be is a big increase in kind of allergens being tossed up into the air. There's also dust and particulate, kind of direct irritant type pollution, and so it really does actually stir things up. And we've all seen, just like driving down the road when there's a dust storm or a big downdraft. But imagine there's things that you don't see that's in the air, the smaller particles, and those get deep into the lung and cause a lot of inflammation. For the healthy person, it may be slightly irritating or nothing at all. But for somebody with a chronic lung disease, it can cause trouble. And this has been studied epidemiologically in terms of these events where if there's a major thunderstorm time during a peak allergy season in an area, that can really show up as an increase in ER visits.
Okay, so you were talking about people with kind of pre-existing conditions and how they're impacted, and you spoke about people who are healthy. Can these environmental impacts ever cause conditions?
Yes, we think they can. And this is true of kind of ozone and as well as particulate pollution. In fact, if you want to cause lung disease in mice, you can expose them to high levels of ozone, and so it's a mouse model for some kinds of asthma. And so these associations have been made. Any one individual, maybe shouldn't be too worried that, the kind of moderate air quality issues that we see in a lot of cities is going to, inevitably cause them to have a lung disease. But what you see is that when the air quality is bad, there is an increase in the new diagnosis of both lung and heart disease. Particulate pollution can get deep into the lung, and then it's even been shown to get all over the body, including the brain. But it can cause inflammation and actually an increase in coronary artery disease and heart attack events. So there are things like studies that show that if you live near a major road versus not, all things being equal, you may be more likely to experience your first heart attack or something like asthma. And then we see studies where in areas that are have poor air quality, that then there's a sudden increase in new diagnosis. It's not a major effect, but when you apply it across a population of a big city, it's real.
Okay. And then moving on to climate, you touched upon this when you mentioned these weather impacts, but as climate is changing, are we seeing higher instances of these diseases and these impacts?
Yeah, we sure are. And, I guess the first thing is that the direct effect of more heat or more extreme temperature and humidity and weather type events causes more symptoms, causes more exacerbations or flare-ups of your condition. But I think one thing that's maybe more important is that the pollen seasons are getting longer. They're starting earlier, and they're more intense, driven by heat and climate change. And so if you're a tree pollen person or a ragweed person during your season, you might start to have problems with that allergen earlier than you're used to by a couple of weeks. You might have more severe problems because there's just a higher level of it being produced. And we're seeing that impact. And that's been fairly persistent over recent years. And our allergy colleagues have been showing that it's continuing to get worse.
So what is the answer? What do you recommend to your patients who are kind of housebound, but then thinking about going outside sounds dangerous to them too? What's the answer?
Yeah, when you're in a room with a patient, like the role is not to solve the world's climate crisis. Although there's a bit that I think it is important for us to make that connection for patients, because we need to elevate the general awareness that our health is being affected by this. And I think the closer climate effects are to people's lived experience on a day-to-day basis, the more real this is going to get, and the more change that's needed is going to happen. So we do mention this, but it's really more practical strategies. And so we talk to our patients about having a plan, really. these events aren't maybe as big as a hurricane or a big natural disaster, but we talk about it in that same language. What is your plan should something happen? Because it's better to be prepared ahead of time than to have to think through this in the moment. And so for a lot of patients that have sensitivity to particulate pollution, the wildfire smoke, the increase in allergens and things, we talk about staying indoors on the worst of days, keeping the windows closed, running if they have central air or central HVAC system of keeping that going continuously, even running the central fan if you don't need air conditioning or don't have it. And simple things, a little expensive, but changing that high efficiency filter on your furnace regularly and making sure you're buying high quality HEPA filters that, or at least MERV 11 or 13, they can be a little bit expensive for sure. You can also make a device. We learned during the COVID pandemic that with a few of these filters, you can create a box and get a fan and put it on top, and you can actually run a lot of your indoor air through a system like that. That's kind of hacked and at home. And if you don't have central air, you can do something like that to now not necessarily clear out COVID, but to clear out particulate pollution. And so a lot of people have to go outside for work or other issues. We just try to recommend limiting that. The N95 masks that we became familiar with during the COVID pandemic for filtering out viral particles are also highly effective at filtering out particulate pollution. They're no good for ozone, but the particles, the wildfire, the dust, the allergens. And for a long time, we've been recommending our allergic patients that are sensitive to pollen. But there's some simple strategies. So, say you're out in your yard or you're out for a walk in a park and there's a lot of pollen. It's helpful to have a hat with a brim. Think about the pollen coming down on you. The brim kind of keeps it out of your face. It's helpful to have, longer sleeves. It's helpful to wear sunglasses to keep it out of your eyes. And sometimes even just maybe not an N95, but a simple dust mask to keep pollen and particulates out is really helpful. And then, say you're outside or doing something or working in your yard where you're exposed to pollen, you want to come home and take a shower and get all that junk off of you. Maybe if you do nasal rinses with saline as a part of your routine, maybe that's a time to do that, to get anything out of the nasal passages. So there's kind of a hygiene about pollen if you're sensitive to it, that you can, try to limit your exposure, but also try to, remediate it by getting rid of it. So what tends to happen is if people don't do that, there's a lot of pollen on them that they may not realize, and then they start rubbing their eyes and rubbing their nose, and pretty soon they have more symptoms. And of course, during allergy season, people tend to have a plan with their doctor ahead of time that we talk about, where before pollen season starts, we might ramp up what you're doing for your asthma or your allergies. You might start a daily regimen of nasal washes and intranasal steroid spray every day. And we might have a plan that we do a little more asthma medication on a daily basis during your difficult times. And we start that before we expect the pollen season to start and through the pollen season. So our patients become very sophisticated about this and learn what their bodies need with the help of their doctors. And sometimes we develop pretty sophisticated plans to keep them safe, and it works pretty well. But other times, it's just too much for a patient who might be particularly vulnerable.
As a doctor, do you find yourself watching weather patterns and thinking, okay, well, the winds are coming from that way with that wildfire. I'm going to have an uptick in patients this week, or allergy season is starting early. This is what's happening after the storm. Do you find yourself more in tune with the weather?
I do. It's funny. Training as a pulmonologist, a specialist in lung disease, we don't necessarily get a training in allergy as much as I think we should. And I have a specialized expertise in asthma, so that's made me more interested in pollen. But at National Jewish Health, we're pretty interdisciplinary. We really learn from each other. Our allergists are better pulmonologists than a lot of the pulmonologists out there. And I hope to know how to spell allergy and things like that. And where I work, I sit right by our allergists. And I've really learned from them quite a bit, but also from my patients. It's becoming more relevant. And so, yes, I am paying more attention, particularly to the allergy seasons and things like that. I think it's a two-way street. We're educating our patients more about this, but quite frankly, they're educating me, and we're learning together how to navigate what are some pretty difficult times between allergy seasons and the difficulties with ozone and particulate pollution and wildfires in the summer.
Have you noticed any indirect impacts? There's a direct impact of the air you breathe, but I think about, climate change causing warmer overnights and people not having restful nights or not sleeping as much. Are there other indirect impacts like that you've noticed?
Yeah, certainly we have a problem at least in the United States, if not globally, um, with with poor sleep quality, and it can have so many reasons. And there are a lot of things that go bump in the night medically, from sleep apnea to allergies and sinus conditions, which tend to be more bothersome at night when you lie down. Heart conditions like heart failure tend to cause breathing problems at night. Asthma, and usually has a circadian variation such that a lot of people, the inflammation from asthma is at its worst around 4 a.m. And it's best around 4 p.m. And so middle of the night, a lot of patients forget their second evening dose of their asthma medicine because they think I'm going to be sleeping. They're busy, they forget. And it turns out that's when you need it the most. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff at night. Reflux is also a problem at night. Just insomnia, and sleep hygiene. Having a cool, dark place to sleep at night is really important. But as we struggle with heat, warm temperature is going to make sleep quality more lower, and getting to sleep more difficult. One of the things I have heard from a lot of my patients recently is just kind of trying to tolerate the higher electric bills and things that they have with having to deal with air conditioning and the hotter summers. Here in Colorado, we're really blessed to have these evenings that cool down dramatically. And so it can be really lovely, even though it might be, hot and sunny all day long, every single day. For 30 days, it's over 90 degrees and sunny. It sounds like a paradise, but sometimes it feels like hell. But when the sun goes down, it all of a sudden cools down, and it feels great. And so what a lot of people will do is kind of open up their windows in the evening and help to cool down their house and maybe reduce their air conditioning bill. And the problem with that is now you're letting in all those allergens and the dusts and the pollutants and the particulate pollution. And so, we've had conversations like, I really need to keep my windows open. It's how I keep my bedroom cool. It's how I can get good sleep. But it turns out that then the air quality bothers me, and I don't know what to do. So I find that interesting. There's an interesting kind of artifact too of the people with sleep apnea that are on this treatment, CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure. They're on this mask that helps to support their breathing at night, help them breathe better. And it comes through a machine and a circuit that does a great job of filtering out all the junk in the air. So the air you're breathing is really quite pure. And we'll hear from people when they go on their CPAP that their allergies got better or that their asthma got better. And some of that may be because they're kind of excluding all the pet dander and environmental pollutants and pollens and things that they might be breathing all night. And they actually can have a much better night. So it's really gets to be fairly complicated. But the bottom line is that all of these things add up, and we're spending more time counseling our patients on kind of navigating that, and what's important and what's not for an individual patient and how to keep them healthy.
That just made me think of something. I have this, my mother-in-law gave me this, have you seen these? They plug in, and she says it purifies the air, but I don't even clearly have it plugged in because I don't understand how something this small would purify air. Set the record straight here, doctor.
Well, there's not a lot of evidence for this, and again, kind of the most important thing is to, when with bad air quality, is keep those windows shut, keep the HVAC system on, change that furnace filter, and buy good quality furnace filters. And really, probably most of the recommended evidence kind of stops there. Humidification can be helpful. But you got to be careful because some of those humidification systems, portable or the centralized ones, are really prone to mold. And so if you try to humidify your air, and now all of a sudden, because you haven't been maintaining it, you're spewing mold all over your house, that can be a big problem. So you got to be careful. But dry air can be a problem for people with allergies and asthma and respiratory disease. It's one of the reasons that we're more likely to get sick when we travel on airplanes, is that the dry air dries out the mucous membranes here in the nose and sinuses. And that makes them more vulnerable to viruses. It makes them more vulnerable to inflammation and injury. So sometimes some humidification, not too much, but done carefully and thoughtfully, can really help. But when we look at these kind of several $1,000 ear purifiers or these smaller devices like this. For the most part, they're probably not harmful, but there's not a lot of evidence that they're really helpful. There's some of these ionizing machines that actually produce ozone, and remember we just talked about that can cause asthma. I'm not sure that the ionizing machines are causing an epidemic of asthma. I wouldn't state that. That hasn't been studied either. but I tell my patients, many of whom don't have a ton of resources, like that's not something I encourage you to spend your money because it's unproven. Don't waste the money on like the duct cleaning and the ionizing, ear purifiers. Spend your money on good quality furnace filters, and spend your time and effort on, what's your plan when the air quality goes bad? How do we, spending your money on the, recommended care plan and these medicines, sometimes all too expensive, that you need to be on consistently, even when you feel well, so that when some irritant comes into your world, you can do better.
Okay, so then if we are trying to solve the world climate problem, is health taken into account enough, in your opinion? Are world leaders taking into account the health impact of climate change enough?
I think it's not fully understood by leaders or the general public, although there has been a lot of effort more recently to elevate this issue, and I think it's gaining traction. One of my professional societies, the American Thoracic Society, which the president last year is our pulmonary division chief here, actually, and she and the American Thoracic Society have really been leaders in communicating about the true threat to global health that this is. And I do think it's starting to resonate. It's certainly resonating with patients. Patients get activated about a lot of things around healthcare, from medication costs to access to care to health system reform. And I'm starting to see them very, very interested in climate change as a motivating factor. So it's generating activation amongst those with chronic illness. I think probably healthy people might not know the privilege they have of being healthy, and but they're starting to hear that message. We need to continue to communicate it. There's so many things that are going to impact health as this gets worse. When we think about, the global movement of people because of climate, it's not just a lack of access to clean water or food or healthy living conditions. We're going to see, for example, with floods, there can be outbreaks of communicable disease and mold. Then you're displacing people into different environments, and they don't have access to healthcare because they're refugees. And your refugee crisis creates a lot of health problems. This is outside of pulmonary, of course, but when you think about the health problems of refugees, everything from not having access to your diabetes medicine to infectious diseases running rampant. And of course, we don't live in a world where we can isolate a refugee camp or a country away from each other. We can't just close the doors. These viruses and these conditions spread throughout the globe. And so as we see more migration, we're going to see more infectious disease. As we see more infectious disease, we're going to have more outbreaks and epidemics and possibly even pandemics. And I think that's it's always hard to alert people about that potential risk. We just got through COVID and people are trying to forget about it already, and we're not ready for the next one. And I really do worry that to individuals experiencing the direct impact of climate, this is going to cause health crises, but it's also a concern for kind of spreading beyond those groups.
Oh, uplifting.
Very not uplifting, but there are things we can do. We understand these things. This is not all a scientific mystery. We understand how people are affected by this. And I think we can put into place, the challenge is more global cooperation and good public policy. I don't know how to solve that problem. It seems quite broken, but we actually know how to address climate change. We know how to improve health related to climate and weather. We know how to identify and treat these chronic illnesses, but we need the political and social will and the resources to do so. We just got to decide we want to fix it. Until we decide we want to fix it, we're not going to make a lot of progress almost.
Well, step one is the patient's understanding, and that seems to be a huge one. Dr. Beuther, is there anything else you want to add about this?
For me, the thing that impacts me the most is my own patients who I'm starting to see their quality of life and their joy going downhill because of the climate and the weather and the challenges that they face. And it was something they didn't have to face before. Do I have to move away from my family because I can't live here anymore? I can't enjoy the summer. I can't enjoy the winter. When can I enjoy my life? And that's really impactful to me. And sometimes as a physician, I'm supposed to have that cape on and go be a hero and fix things. And I can't always fix this. And I'm doing a lot more, trying to help counsel them through this. And I just hope other people are listening, and I hope that we can make some progress on this.
Off the Radar is a production of the National Weather Desk. Make sure you're following the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes published every Tuesday. Also, please rate and review the podcast on Spotify and Apple. Thank you to Dr. David Beuther for joining me today to talk about how weather and climate changes impact our lungs. Thanks to the National Weather Desk and Sinclair Broadcast Group for their ongoing support of the podcast, and as always to my associate producer, Brian Petrus, for his help with today's episode. I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie. Make it a great day.